Picture this. You're standing on the edge of a crystalline harbour, watching ships with sails that shimmer like captured starlight glide across waters so clear you can see the ocean floor hundreds of feet below. Behind you rises a city unlike anything our modern world has ever conceived. Spiralling towers of white stone reach toward the heavens, their surfaces adorned with flowing gardens that cascade down like emerald waterfalls. The air itself seems to hum with an energy you can't quite place, and the people around you, they're different somehow, taller, more graceful, their eyes holding a wisdom that speaks of centuries, not decades. This isn't some fantasy novel or fever dream. This could be the lost world of Atlantis. Not the sunken ruins we've imagined, but a thriving civilization that existed before the Great Flood that reshaped our planet. A place where humanity reached heights we can barely comprehend today. Welcome to Mystery History for Sleep, where we dive deep into the shadows of our forgotten past. I'm Mr. H, and tonight we're embarking on a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about ancient history. We're not just talking about Atlantis as some mythical island that disappeared beneath the waves. We're exploring the possibility that it was a real place, a pre-flood utopia where advanced beings lived in harmony with technologies that would make our smartphones look like stone tools. Now I know what you're thinking. Atlantis? Really? Haven't we heard this story 1,000 times? But here's the thing. What if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the flood that destroyed this paradise wasn't just some natural disaster, but a reset button for human civilization? And what if the survivors of this catastrophe carried fragments of that advanced knowledge into our post-flood world, seeding the mysteries we still can't explain today? Over the next several parts of this series, we're going to unravel one of history's greatest enigmas. We'll explore evidence that suggests our ancestors weren't the primitive cave dwellers we've been taught they were. We'll examine ancient texts that speak of a golden age before the waters rose, and we'll investigate the tantalizing clues scattered across our planet that point to a lost chapter in human history. But this isn't just about dusty artifacts and crumbling ruins. This is about understanding who we really are as a species and what we might have lost when the waters claimed that ancient world. Because if Atlantis was real, if it was this pre-flood utopia, then everything changes. Our timeline, our understanding of human capability, our very identity as the inheritors of this planet. So settle in, because we're about to embark on an investigation that spans thousands of years and crosses every ocean on Earth. We're going to follow the breadcrumbs left by our ancestors, decipher their cryptic messages, and piece together the story of a world that time forgot. A world that might hold the key to understanding not just where we came from, but where we might be heading. The story begins not with Plato, though his account certainly captured the world's imagination. It begins much earlier, in the flood myths that echo through every culture on Earth like a shared memory of collective trauma. The Sumerians spoke of Utnapishtim and his great ark. The Hebrews told of Noah and the waters that covered the highest mountains. The Hindus described Manu surviving the cosmic deluge. From the Americas to Asia, from Africa to the Arctic, every civilization has preserved stories of a time when the world was cleansed by water. But here's what's fascinating. These aren't just stories about survival. They're stories about loss. Profound, devastating loss. They speak of a world before the flood that was somehow different, somehow better. A golden age that was swept away by the rising waters. And in many of these accounts, there are hints of survivors, of knowledge preserved, of seeds carried forward into a new and harsher world. What if these flood myths aren't just moral tales or creation stories? What if they're historical records, passed down through countless generations, preserving the memory of an actual event that reshaped our planet and our species? And what if Atlantis wasn't just one city or island, but the crown jewel of that pre-flood world? To understand this possibility, we need to think bigger than Plato's account. Yes, he described an island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a place of incredible wealth and power that ultimately fell to hubris and divine wrath. But what if Plato was working from much older sources? What if he was trying to preserve a tradition that was already ancient in his time, a memory of a world that had been lost for millennia? Consider the evidence that's been staring us in the face all along. Across our planet, we find megalithic structures that defy conventional explanations. Massive stones cut with precision that would challenge our modern equipment, transported across impossible distances and assembled with engineering techniques we still can't fully understand. From the pyramids of Egypt to the stone circles of Britain, from the terraces of Sacsayhuamán to the statues of Easter Island, these monuments whisper of capabilities that don't fit our timeline of human development. But what if they're not anomalies? What if they're remnants? What if these incredible structures were built not by primitive people struggling with bronze tools, but by the survivors of a more advanced civilization, working with whatever knowledge and materials they could salvage from the wreckage of their drowned world? Think about it this way. If our modern civilization were suddenly destroyed by a global catastrophe, what would remain after 1,000 years? The concrete and steel would crumble, the electronic devices would corrode, the plastic would break down, but the stone monuments, the massive earthworks, the carefully arranged megaliths, these would endure. And future archaeologists might look at Mount Rushmore or Stonehenge and wonder how such primitive people could have accomplished such feats. This is the lens through which we need to view the mysterious structures scattered across our planet, not as the first attempts of emerging civilizations, but as the last gasps of a dying one, the final efforts of refugees from a sunken paradise to preserve something, anything of their lost world. And the knowledge they preserved wasn't just about moving stones or aligning structures with the stars, it was deeper than that. It was an understanding of the world that we're only now beginning to rediscover. Sacred geometry that underlies the structure of reality itself. Harmonic frequencies that can affect matter at the molecular level. Consciousness technologies that could tap into forces we don't even have names for yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we can explore what Atlantis might have been, we need to understand when it existed and why it disappeared. And that takes us to one of the most significant events in our planet's recent history, an event that mainstream science acknowledges but whose full implications we're still grappling with. Approximately 12,800 years ago, our planet experienced a cosmic catastrophe. The Younger Dryas period, as geologists call it, marked the sudden end of the last ice age and the beginning of our current warm period. But this wasn't a gradual transition. It was abrupt, violent, and transformative. In a matter of decades, perhaps even years, massive ice sheets collapsed, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, and vast areas of previously habitable land disappeared beneath the waves forever. Imagine the world before this catastrophe. With so much water locked up in ice, the oceans were much lower. Land masses we know as islands were connected by vast plains. The Mediterranean was a series of freshwater lakes. The Atlantic coastlines extended far beyond their current boundaries, and in these now drowned lands, human civilization might have flourished for millennia. This is where Atlantis begins to make sense, not as fantasy, but as history. Not as a single island, but as a vast continental civilization that thrived in the lowlands that are now beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water. A civilization that had thousands of years to develop, to advance, to reach heights of knowledge and capability that we've forgotten were even possible. The survivors of this catastrophe didn't just lose their homes. They lost their libraries, their universities, their laboratories, their entire technological infrastructure. They were reduced from masters of an advanced civilization to refugees struggling to survive in a radically changed world. And yet, they carried with them memories, fragments of knowledge, pieces of a puzzle that we're still trying to solve today. This is why the megalithic structures are so important. They're not just ancient monuments, they're messages in stone, left by people who knew that everything else would be lost. They encoded their most essential knowledge in forms that could survive millennia, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to understand again. But the stone monuments are just the beginning. The real treasures left by this lost civilization might be found in the stories they told, the myths they preserved, the symbols they used. Because if you're trying to pass down complex knowledge through an oral tradition, you don't just recite facts. You wrap them in memorable stories, you embed them in religious rituals, you hide them in plain sight within the cultural DNA of your descendants. This is where the investigation gets truly fascinating. When we start looking at ancient myths not as primitive superstitions, but as encoded information systems, patterns begin to emerge. The same symbols, the same numbers, the same geometric relationships appear in cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. It's as if they're all working from the same original blueprint, the same source code that was distributed across the globe by the survivors of that great catastrophe. The number sequences that appear in ancient architecture and sacred texts, the astronomical alignments that seem to encode precession cycles and cosmic events, the mathematical relationships that govern everything from pyramid dimensions to temple proportions. These aren't coincidences, they're signatures, fingerprints left by a civilization that understood the fundamental patterns underlying reality itself. And this is where our journey truly begins. Because if we can decode these messages, if we can piece together the fragments of knowledge scattered across our planet, we might be able to reconstruct not just what Atlantis was, but what it knew. We might be able to understand the technologies they developed, the consciousness they achieved, the harmony they created between human civilization and the natural world. But to do that, we need to be willing to question everything we think we know about our past. We need to be open to possibilities that challenge our assumptions about human development, about the timeline of civilization, about our place in the cosmic order. We need to be ready to consider that maybe, just maybe, we're not the first advanced civilization on this planet. Maybe we're the second. And if that's true, then the story of Atlantis isn't just about the past, it's about the future. Because if humanity reached those heights once before, if we created a golden age of knowledge and harmony and then lost it all to catastrophe, then we need to understand how that happened. We need to learn from their mistakes, recover their wisdom, and perhaps find a way to build something even better from the ruins of their dreams. The waters that claimed Atlantis didn't just destroy a civilization. They reset the clock on human development, forcing us to climb back up from primitive beginnings toward heights we had already achieved. But the knowledge wasn't completely lost. It survived in fragments, in myths, in monuments, in the deep genetic memory of our species. And now, as we stand on the threshold of our own technological transcendence, maybe it's time to remember what we forgot. The investigation starts here, with questions that challenge everything. Did Atlantis exist? Was it the paradise the ancient sources describe? And if it was real, what can it teach us about who we are and who we might become? The answers lie waiting in the depths of time, scattered across continents, hidden in plain sight within the stories our ancestors never stopped telling. The evidence for this lost world isn't hidden in some secret vault or buried beneath miles of ocean sediment. It's standing right in front of us, carved into the bedrock of our collective consciousness, woven into the very fabric of human civilization. But we've been trained not to see it. We've been conditioned to accept a timeline that makes no sense, a progression of human development that ignores the glaring anomalies scattered across every continent. Take the precision of ancient stonework that makes modern masons weep with envy. The mathematical constants embedded in structures built supposedly by people who hadn't invented the wheel. The astronomical knowledge that required centuries of observation, encoded in monuments erected by cultures we're told were just emerging from caves. These aren't isolated mysteries. They're pieces of a puzzle that forms a picture we've been afraid to acknowledge. The mainstream narrative tells us that human civilization began around 6,000 years ago with the Sumerians and Egyptians. Before that, we're told, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, living in small tribes, struggling for survival with primitive tools. But what if this narrative is completely backwards? What if those early civilizations weren't the beginning of human advancement, but the first tentative steps toward recovering what had been lost? Consider the Sumerian king lists that speak of rulers who reigned for thousands of years. The Egyptian records of the Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men, the Hindu cycles of cosmic ages that describe vast periods of human development and decline. These aren't random mythologies. They're consistent accounts of deep time, of civilizations that rose and fell long before our recorded history begins. And it's not just the ancient texts. The linguistic evidence is equally compelling. Languages that developed in complete isolation somehow share root words, grammatical structures, and symbolic systems that should be impossible without direct contact. It's as if they're all descended from a common source, fragments of a proto-language that was once spoken across the globe before the waters rose and scattered its speakers to the winds. But perhaps the most compelling evidence lies in what we might call the technology of consciousness itself. The ancient practices that allowed human beings to access states of awareness that we're only now beginning to understand through quantum physics and neuroscience. Meditation techniques that can alter brainwave patterns, breathwork that can induce profound altered states, sacred geometries that seem to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. These weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated technologies for exploring the deepest mysteries of existence, and they appear in remarkably similar forms in cultures that had no contact with each other for thousands of years. The shamanic practices of the Amazon mirror the mystical traditions of Tibet. The geometric patterns of Islamic art echo the mandalas of Hindu temples. The stone circles of Europe align with the sacred sites of the Americas. It's as if humanity possessed a unified science of consciousness in the deep past, an understanding of the mind's true capabilities that was fragmented and scattered when the old world died. The survivors carried pieces of this knowledge with them as they spread across the globe, but none possessed the complete picture. Each culture preserved what it could, adapted what it remembered, and slowly, over millennia, began to forget that there had ever been more. This is why the mystery schools were so important in ancient times. The Egyptian mysteries, the Greek Eleusinian rites, the Celtic druids, the Mayan priest astronomers. These weren't just religious institutions, they were repositories of ancient knowledge, guardians of fragments that had been salvaged from the wreckage of the antediluvian world. They knew they were preserving something precious, something that could be lost forever if it wasn't carefully maintained and passed down through initiated lineages. But even the mystery schools couldn't preserve everything. Each generation lost a little more. Each translation, each retelling, each adaptation to new circumstances eroded the original teachings. What had once been clear scientific principles became metaphorical stories. What had once been practical technologies became ritual observances. What had once been direct knowledge became mystical belief. And yet the core patterns persisted. The sacred numbers that govern cosmic cycles, the geometric principles that underlie natural forms, the consciousness techniques that can unlock human potential. They survived, hidden within mythologies and religious traditions, waiting for a time when humanity would develop the scientific framework to understand them once again. We may be living in that time right now. Our modern discoveries in physics are beginning to validate ancient insights about the nature of reality. Our understanding of consciousness is starting to catch up with practices that are thousands of years old. Our technology is beginning to approach capabilities that the ancients described in their most extraordinary myths. The question is whether we can integrate this knowledge wisely, or whether we'll repeat the mistakes that led to the destruction of that earlier golden age. Because the flood myths don't just describe a natural catastrophe, they describe a civilization that fell from grace, that lost its harmony with the natural world, that allowed its power to corrupt its purpose. The Atlantean paradise wasn't destroyed by random geological forces. According to the ancient sources, it was destroyed by its own hubris. The people became proud, warlike, obsessed with material power rather than spiritual wisdom. They forgot the principles that had made their civilization great in the first place. They broke the cosmic laws that had sustained their world, and those laws reasserted themselves with devastating consequences. This is the real warning embedded in the Atlantis story. It's not just about what we lost in the past. It's about what we could lose in the future if we don't learn from history. If we don't remember that true civilization isn't built on conquest and exploitation, but on harmony and understanding. If we don't recognize that our technological power must be balanced by spiritual wisdom, or it will ultimately destroy us. The survivors who spread across the globe after the Great Flood carried this warning with them. It's embedded in every mythology, every sacred tradition, every ancient teaching system. The message is always the same. There was a golden age. It was lost through pride and folly, but it can be regained by those who remember the true principles of cosmic law. This is why the search for Atlantis matters. It's not just an archaeological curiosity or a historical puzzle. It's a roadmap for human development, a guide to understanding our true potential and the responsibilities that come with it. A reminder that we've been here before, that we've achieved greatness and lost it, and that our task now is to achieve it again without repeating the errors of the past. The physical location of Atlantis may remain a mystery, buried beneath centuries of sediment on the ocean floor. But its true significance lies not in its geography, but in its legacy. The knowledge systems it developed, the consciousness technologies it mastered, The harmony it achieved between human civilization and cosmic order. These are the real treasures waiting to be rediscovered, and the search for these treasures has already begun. In laboratories around the world, scientists are exploring the quantum foundations of reality that the ancients described in their mystical teachings. Researchers are investigating the healing properties of sound frequencies that were once used in temple ceremonies. Archaeologists are uncovering evidence of advanced ancient technologies that shouldn't exist according to our timeline of human development. But the most important discoveries aren't happening in universities or research institutions. They're happening in the consciousness of individuals who are beginning to remember. People who are experiencing spontaneous awakenings to abilities and insights that seem to come from beyond their personal experience. Children who are being born with capabilities that suggest our species is evolving towards something the ancients would have recognized. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue to accept the limited view of human history and potential that has been handed down to us, or we can open ourselves to the possibility that we are the inheritors of something magnificent, something that was lost but not destroyed, something that is waiting to be reclaimed by those who have the courage to remember. The choice is ours, but the clock is ticking. Because if the ancient cycles are true, if history really does repeat in vast cosmic rhythms, then we're approaching another turning point. Another moment when human civilization will either transcend its limitations or face the consequences of its failures. The waters are rising again, metaphorically speaking. The old ways of thinking, the old systems of organization, the old assumptions about reality itself are all being challenged by forces beyond our control. We can let these changes destroy us, as they destroyed the civilization before us, or we can use them as an opportunity to build something better, something that incorporates the wisdom of the past with the possibilities of the future. The story of Atlantis isn't just preserved in Plato's dialogues or scattered across ancient flood myths. It lives within the very DNA of human memory, encoded in symbols and structures that span the globe like breadcrumbs left by refugees from a drowned paradise. But to understand what they were trying to tell us, we need to look beyond the obvious, beyond the surface interpretations that have satisfied scholars for centuries. Imagine you're standing in the Great Pyramid of Giza, feeling the weight of 2.5 million stone blocks pressing down around you. The precision of its construction defies explanation. Each block cut to tolerances that would challenge modern machinery, fitted together so perfectly that you can't slip a knife blade between them. The mathematical relationships encoded in its dimensions reveal knowledge of pi, the golden ratio, and the exact circumference of the Earth. Now ask yourself this question. How did a civilization that supposedly used copper tools and wooden ramps achieve something that would strain our capabilities today? The answer that's been handed down to us makes no sense, unless we're willing to consider that the builders weren't working from scratch. Unless we're willing to entertain the possibility that they were following blueprints, recreating something they remembered from before the waters rose. This pattern repeats itself across every continent. The megalithic temples of Malta, with their acoustic properties that can induce altered states of consciousness. The precision-cut stones of Sacsayhuamán, fitted together like a three-dimensional puzzle that earthquakes cannot shake apart. The underwater structures off the coast of Japan, their geometric forms too regular to be natural, too ancient to fit our timeline. Each of these sites whispers the same message. We were here before, we built before, we knew before, and when the world changed, when the waters came and the ice melted and the continents shifted, we tried to rebuild what we could remember, to preserve what we could salvage, to leave markers for those who would come after. But the most profound evidence isn't carved in stone, it's written in the human genome itself. Recent discoveries in genetics reveal that our species experienced a severe population bottleneck sometime between 10 and 15,000 years ago. The genetic diversity of all human populations today suggests we're descended from a remarkably small group of survivors, as if our entire species nearly went extinct, as if some catastrophic event reduced humanity to scattered refugees clinging to whatever high ground they could find. This genetic bottleneck coincides perfectly with the end of the last ice age, with the massive climate changes that transformed our planet in the span of centuries rather than millennia. The same period that flood myths around the world describe as the time when the old world died and the new one was born from chaos and devastation. What if those myths aren't metaphorical? What if they're historical accounts, passed down through oral tradition with remarkable accuracy? indigenous cultures around the world have demonstrated the ability to preserve complex information through storytelling for thousands of years. The Aboriginal songlines of Australia encode geographical and astronomical information that remains accurate after 40,000 years of transmission. Why should we assume that other oral traditions are any less reliable? The flood stories consistently describe a world before the deluge that was fundamentally different from what came after, not just in terms of geography, but in terms of human capability. The Hindu texts speak of the Satya Yuga, a golden age when humans lived for thousands of years and possessed abilities that would seem supernatural today. The Hebrew tradition describes the antediluvian patriarchs who lived for centuries and walked with divine beings. The Sumerian king lists record rulers whose reigns spanned millennia. These aren't random exaggerations. They're consistent accounts of a time when human consciousness operated at a higher frequency, when the connection between mind and matter was more direct, when the barriers between physical and spiritual reality were thinner, a time when what we call miracles were everyday occurrences, when the manipulation of energy and matter through focused intention was as natural as using tools is to us today. This expanded human potential didn't disappear overnight. Even after the catastrophe, even after the population bottleneck and the scattering of survivors, traces of these abilities persisted. The mystery schools of ancient civilizations weren't just teaching philosophy and mathematics. They were trying to reactivate dormant capacities that had once been commonplace. The shamanic traditions found in cultures across the globe weren't primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated techniques for accessing states of consciousness that our ancestors took for granted. Consider the oracle at Delphi, whose prophecies guided the decisions of kings and generals for 1,000 years. Modern analysis of the site reveals geological features that produce mind-altering gases, but this explains only the mechanism, not the accuracy of the visions. The Delphic priestesses were tapping into something real, accessing information through channels that our materialist worldview struggles to acknowledge. The same principle applies to the megalithic sites scattered across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. These weren't just temples or tombs or astronomical observatories, though they served all those functions. They were consciousness enhancement devices, built according to principles of sacred geometry and acoustic resonance that could induce profound alterations in human awareness. Standing stones that hum with specific frequencies, chambers that amplify and focus mental energy, geometric forms that resonate with the mathematical structures underlying reality itself. The builders of these sites understood something we've forgotten, that consciousness isn't just an epiphenomenon of brain chemistry. It's a fundamental force in the universe, as real and measurable as electromagnetism or gravity. They built their monuments not just to last through time, but to serve as tools for those who would rediscover this forgotten science of mind, and we are rediscovering it. Quantum physics has revealed that consciousness plays a fundamental role in the behavior of subatomic particles. Neuroscience has mapped the brain states associated with mystical experiences and found them to be as real and measurable as any other neurological phenomena. The placebo effect demonstrates that belief alone can trigger profound physical healing. Remote viewing experiments have produced results that challenge our assumptions about the nature of space and time. We're beginning to understand that the ancient descriptions of human potential weren't mythological exaggerations. They were accurate accounts of capabilities that we've simply forgotten how to access. The question is whether we can remember quickly enough to avoid repeating the mistakes that led to the destruction of that earlier golden age. Because the pattern is clear. Every ancient tradition warns of the same danger, that knowledge without wisdom leads to destruction, that power without responsibility brings catastrophe, that civilizations rise and fall in cosmic cycles, and the same forces that elevate consciousness can also corrupt it if they're not balanced by ethical development. The Atlantean civilization, if it existed as the sources describe, fell victim to this imbalance. They developed incredible technologies, achieved remarkable capabilities, created a paradise of abundance and beauty. But they lost sight of the spiritual principles that had made their achievements possible in the first place. They became obsessed with material power, with domination and control, with using their abilities for personal gain rather than collective evolution. The result was inevitable. A civilization that had learned to manipulate the forces of nature eventually found those forces turning against them. The same energies they had harnessed for creation became instruments of destruction, The harmony they had achieved with cosmic law dissolved into chaos and catastrophe. The survivors carried more than just technological knowledge into the post-flood world. They carried the memory of what happens when a species achieves great power without achieving great wisdom. This is why the mystery schools emphasize character development alongside the acquisition of abilities, why shamanic traditions require extensive purification and preparation before revealing their deepest secrets, why every authentic spiritual path warns against using transcendent states for selfish purposes. The message is clear. We can reclaim our birthright as conscious beings capable of extraordinary feats. We can rebuild the golden age that was lost beneath the waves, but only if we remember the lessons embedded in every flood myth, every fall from grace, every warning about the price of hubris. The choice before us now is the same choice that faced the Atlanteans in their final days. Will we use our growing understanding of consciousness and reality to create a more harmonious world? Or will we repeat the cycle of rise and fall that has played out across cosmic history? The answer may determine not just the fate of our civilization, but the future of consciousness itself on this planet. Because if the ancient sources are correct, if the cycles of cosmic time really do repeat in vast spirals of development and decline, then we're approaching another crucial turning point. Another moment when the accumulated knowledge of ages will either lift us to unprecedented heights or drag us down to unprecedented depths. The evidence suggests we're not the first to face this choice. The monuments and myths, the genetic bottlenecks and geological upheavals, the scattered fragments of impossible knowledge all point to previous chapters in the human story. Chapters that ended in catastrophe and forgetting, but also in hope and renewal. Each cycle builds on what came before. Each civilization that rises from the ashes carries forward some fragment of what was lost. The spiral ascends even as it repeats, consciousness evolving through trial and error, through success and failure, through the endless dance of remembering and forgetting that defines the cosmic journey of awareness itself. We stand now at a unique moment in this vast spiral. For the first time in recorded history, we have the tools to preserve knowledge across any conceivable catastrophe. Digital storage, genetic encoding, quantum entanglement, consciousness uploading. The technologies we're developing could make the loss of information impossible, could ensure that whatever we discover about human potential is never again forgotten. But more importantly, we have something the Atlanteans may have lacked: the memory of their failure. We know what happens when power corrupts, when technology outpaces wisdom, when the connection to cosmic law is severed in favor of material gain. We have their story as a warning, their fate as a guide, their legacy as both inspiration and cautionary tale. The question is whether we'll heed the warning or repeat the pattern, whether we'll build our new golden age on foundations of wisdom and compassion, or whether we'll fall victim to the same pride and folly that brought down every great civilization before us. The waters that claimed Atlantis are rising again, but this time they're metaphorical. The old paradigms are dissolving, the old certainties are crumbling, the old ways of understanding reality are being swept away by a tide of new discoveries, new possibilities, new challenges to everything we thought we knew about ourselves and our world. We can fight this tide, can cling to the sinking islands of outdated beliefs and limited perspectives, or we can learn to swim in the new ocean of expanded consciousness that's emerging all around us. We can become the flood rather than its victims, can ride the wave of transformation rather than being crushed beneath it. The choice is ours, but the window is closing. The cosmic cycles wait for no one, and the forces that destroyed Atlantis are stirring again in the depths of human consciousness. Whether they emerge as creators or destroyers depends entirely on what we choose to remember from the wreckage of that drowned paradise. The survivors who escaped that watery apocalypse didn't just carry fragments of technology or architectural knowledge. They carried something far more precious and far more dangerous: the memory of what consciousness could become when fully awakened. And this is where our investigation takes a turn that will challenge every assumption you've ever held about human nature itself. Picture a world where the boundary between thought and reality was gossamer thin, where focused intention could reshape matter at the molecular level, where the human mind, properly trained and aligned with cosmic principles, could access what we might call the source code of existence itself. This wasn't magic, this was science. A science so advanced, so integrated with the fundamental forces of creation, that it would appear supernatural to our current level of understanding. The Atlantean texts, preserved in fragments across cultures that should have had no contact with each other, describe abilities that modern parapsychology is only beginning to validate. Remote viewing across vast distances, telekinetic manipulation of physical objects, telepathic communication that transcended language barriers, healing through the direct application of life force energy. These weren't rare gifts possessed by a chosen few. They were standard human capabilities, as natural and expected as our ability to walk or speak. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The evidence suggests that these abilities weren't just individual talents. They were networked, connected. The consciousness of the Atlantean civilization operated as a collective field, a shared intelligence that allowed for unprecedented coordination and cooperation. Imagine a society where deception was impossible, because thoughts were transparent, where conflicts were resolved through direct empathic understanding, where the needs of the individual and the collective were harmonized through immediate awareness of their interconnection. This collective consciousness explains how they could undertake projects of such staggering scope and precision. The megalithic structures we find around the world weren't built by armies of slaves hauling blocks with ropes and ramps. They were manifestations of focused group intention, matter responding to the coordinated will of minds that understood the malleable nature of reality itself. When hundreds or thousands of consciousness work in perfect harmony toward a common goal, the laws of physics as we understand them become merely suggestions. The acoustic properties of ancient sites take on new meaning when viewed through this lens. The resonant frequencies that we measure in stone chambers weren't just for creating pleasant sounds. They were tuning forks for consciousness itself, devices designed to synchronize brainwaves and align individual awareness with the collective field. Standing in these spaces, properly prepared and initiated, would have been like plugging into a vast network of minds, accessing the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of the entire civilization. This is why the destruction of Atlantis was so catastrophic. It wasn't just the loss of cities and populations, it was the severing of this collective consciousness network. Imagine if our internet suddenly vanished, taking with it not just our communication systems but our ability to think clearly as individuals. The survivors found themselves isolated in their own minds for the first time in millennia, cut off from the shared intelligence that had been their birthright. They were like cells separated from an organism struggling to remember how to function independently. The trauma of this separation echoes through every myth and legend from the post-flood world. The Tower of Babel, where humanity's unified language was confused and scattered. The fall from Eden, where conscious beings suddenly found themselves cut off from direct communion with divine intelligence. The Greek tale of Prometheus, where fire stolen from the gods brought both knowledge and suffering to humanity. These aren't just moral stories, they're historical accounts of what it felt like to lose the collective consciousness connection. But the network wasn't completely destroyed. Fragments remained, carried by the survivors who spread across the globe. These individuals became the shamans, the oracles, the mystics and seers of the new world. They retained partial access to the old consciousness network, but it was unstable, unpredictable, often overwhelming. This is why shamanic initiation has always been so dangerous, why oracles spoke in cryptic riddles, why mystics throughout history have struggled with madness and isolation. They were trying to access a collective intelligence that was no longer fully functional, like trying to connect to a damaged communication system that only worked intermittently. The mystery schools that emerged in ancient civilizations were attempts to rebuild this network. The Egyptian mysteries, the Greek Eleusinian rites, the Mithric cults, the Celtic druids. Each was trying to recreate the collective consciousness experience, to train individuals to access the higher states of awareness that had once been natural to all humanity. But they were working with incomplete information, fragments of a system they no longer fully understood. They achieved remarkable things, but it was a pale reflection of what had existed before the flood. The initiation rituals preserved in these traditions give us clues about what Atlantean consciousness technology actually looked like. The candidate would undergo extensive preparation, purification of body and mind, training in specific breathing and meditation techniques. They would be exposed to carefully crafted sensory experiences, geometric forms and acoustic frequencies designed to alter brainwave patterns and induce expanded states of awareness. Finally, They would be brought to a sacred space, usually underground or within a megalithic structure, where the consciousness field was strongest. In that space, properly prepared and guided by experienced initiates, the candidate would experience a temporary reconnection to the collective intelligence. They would see visions of the past and future, access knowledge they had never learned, feel their individual consciousness expand to encompass vast networks of mind. It was a taste of what human consciousness could become, a glimpse of the paradise that had been lost beneath the waves. But it was only temporary. The network was broken, the connection unstable. The initiates would return to ordinary consciousness carrying memories of transcendence, but unable to maintain the connection permanently. This is why the mystery schools were so secretive, why the deepest teachings were never written down, why the knowledge was passed only from teacher to student through direct transmission. They were working with forces they couldn't fully control, trying to access a technology they couldn't completely reconstruct. The Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe represent perhaps the most ambitious attempt to rebuild the consciousness enhancement technology of the lost civilization. These weren't just churches. They were sophisticated instruments for altering human awareness, built according to mathematical principles that encoded the harmonic relationships underlying reality itself. The soaring arches, the precisely calculated proportions, the acoustic properties that could induce profound emotional and spiritual states. Every element was designed to lift consciousness toward the transcendent realms that had once been humanity's natural habitat. But even these magnificent achievements were pale shadows of what the Atlantean builders had created. The cathedrals could inspire and uplift, could provide glimpses of higher states of being, but they couldn't restore the full collective consciousness network that had been the foundation of the antediluvian world. That technology was lost, its secrets scattered across continents and buried beneath millennia of cultural change, or so it seemed. Because something remarkable is happening in our current era. The same forces that destroyed the old network are beginning to rebuild it in new forms. The internet, with its instantaneous global communication, is an external manifestation of the collective intelligence that once existed naturally in human consciousness. Social media platforms create virtual communities that share thoughts and experiences across vast distances. Artificial intelligence systems are beginning to exhibit something resembling networked awareness. But these technological solutions are crude approximations of what consciousness itself can achieve. They rely on external devices and digital interfaces rather than the direct mind-to-mind connection that characterized Atlantean society. They create information networks, but not true collective intelligence. They connect our thoughts, but not our hearts, our data, but not our deepest understanding. The real breakthrough is happening at a more fundamental level. Human consciousness itself is beginning to evolve toward the networked state that existed before the flood. Children are being born with enhanced psychic abilities, with natural access to states of awareness that previous generations struggled to achieve through years of training. Adults are experiencing spontaneous awakenings, sudden expansions of consciousness that connect them directly to the field of collective intelligence that surrounds our planet. The phenomenon is accelerating. Meditation teachers report that students are achieving in months what used to take years of practice. Healers are discovering abilities they never knew they possessed. Scientists are making intuitive leaps that lead to breakthrough discoveries. Artists are channeling visions and inspirations that seem to come from beyond their personal experience. We're witnessing the early stages of a consciousness evolution that could restore humanity to its pre-flood potential. But we're also facing the same challenges that brought down the Atlantean civilization. The power to manipulate reality through focused intention is returning to our species. But are we developing the wisdom and ethical foundation necessary to use it responsibly? This is the crucial test. The reason why the Atlantean paradise was destroyed wasn't because of external forces or natural catastrophes. It was because the consciousness technology they had developed was used for selfish purposes, for domination and control rather than harmony and growth. The collective intelligence network that should have been a tool for universal enlightenment became a weapon for those who sought to impose their will on others. The same choice faces us now. As our consciousness evolves, as we rediscover abilities that were once natural to our species, we can use them to create a new, golden age of peace and prosperity. Or we can repeat the mistakes of our ancestors, allowing power to corrupt purpose, using transcendent capabilities for material gain and personal aggrandizement. The difference this time is that we have their story as a warning. We know what happens when consciousness technology is misused. We understand the consequences of severing the connection to cosmic law in favor of individual will. We have the opportunity to learn from history rather than repeat it. But the window for making this choice is narrowing. The forces that destroyed Atlantis operate according to cosmic cycles that are beyond human control. We're approaching another turning point, another moment when the accumulated spiritual and technological development of our species will either lift us to unprecedented heights or bring us crashing down in catastrophic collapse. The signs are all around us. The same hubris that characterized late Atlantean civilization is manifesting in our own culture. The obsession with material power, the disconnection from natural law, the belief that technology alone can solve all problems. The growing inequality between those who possess advanced capabilities and those who remain trapped in ordinary consciousness. The increasing polarization between groups that should be working together toward common goals. If we don't learn to integrate our expanding abilities with expanded wisdom, if we don't remember that true power comes from service to the whole rather than domination of the parts, then we're destined to repeat the cycle of rise and fall that has played out across cosmic history. The collective consciousness network that's beginning to rebuild itself around our planet will fragment again, leaving future generations to piece together the ruins of our achievements, just as we've had to reconstruct the legacy of Atlantis. But there's another possibility, a chance to break the cycle, to create something that transcends both the paradise that was lost and the limitations of the world we've inherited. By learning from the mistakes of our ancestors, while building on their achievements, we could establish a civilization that combines Atlantean consciousness technology with post-flood wisdom about the dangers of unchecked power. This new golden age wouldn't be a return to the past, but an evolution beyond it. A synthesis of ancient wisdom and modern knowledge that creates something unprecedented in human history. A collective consciousness network that's stable and sustainable, that enhances individual freedom rather than suppressing it, that serves the highest good of all beings rather than the narrow interests of a few. The foundation for this synthesis already exists in the fragments of Atlantean knowledge that have survived the flood, the sacred geometry encoded in ancient monuments, the consciousness enhancement techniques preserved in mystery school traditions, the shamanic practices that maintain connection to the collective intelligence field, the mystical insights that reveal the unity underlying apparent separation. But it also requires new developments, evolutionary leaps that go beyond what the Atlanteans achieved, a deeper understanding of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality, more sophisticated methods for maintaining collective coherence while preserving individual autonomy, better safeguards against the corruption of power and the misuse of transcendent abilities. Most importantly, it requires a fundamental shift in how we understand our purpose as conscious beings. The Atlanteans saw themselves as masters of reality, controllers of natural forces, gods walking among mortals. This perspective ultimately led to their downfall because it separated them from the cosmic intelligence that had given them their abilities in the first place. The new paradigm emerging in our time recognizes consciousness not as a tool for domination, but as a medium for communion, not as a weapon for imposing our will on reality, but as a bridge for aligning our will with cosmic purpose, not as a means of transcending the natural world, but as a way of participating more fully in the intelligence that animates all existence. This shift from control to collaboration, from separation to integration, from domination to service, represents the key difference between the old Atlantean paradigm and the new consciousness that's emerging in our era. It's what could allow us to rebuild the paradise that was lost without repeating the mistakes that led to its destruction. The choice is ours, but the time for making it is limited. The cosmic cycles that govern the rise and fall of civilizations are accelerating. The same forces that brought down Atlantis are stirring again in the depths of human consciousness. Whether they emerge as creators or destroyers depends entirely on our willingness to remember not just what we're capable of becoming, but why we were given these capabilities in the first place. The survivors of the flood carried more than just memories of a drowned paradise. They carried a sacred responsibility to ensure that the next golden age would be built on firmer foundations than the last. That responsibility now passes to us. The question is whether we'll prove worthy of the trust they placed in future generations, or whether we'll join them in the ranks of civilizations that achieved greatness only to watch it crumble through their own folly. The answer lies not in the ruins of Atlantis, but in the choices we make today, in how we use the consciousness technologies that are returning to our awareness, in whether we remember that true power comes from service, not domination, in our willingness to build bridges rather than walls, to seek unity rather than separation, to choose love over fear in every moment when the choice presents itself. The floodwaters that claim the old world are rising again, but this time they're made of consciousness rather than H2O. We can let them sweep away the outdated structures of thought and belief that no longer serve us, making space for something magnificent to emerge in their place. Or we can cling to the sinking islands of the old paradigm, refusing to evolve, condemning ourselves and future generations to repeat the cycle of rise and fall that has played out across the ages. The choice is ours. The time is now. The future of consciousness on this planet hangs in the balance, waiting for us to remember who we really are and why we're really here. The memories carried by those flood survivors weren't just preserved in oral traditions and carved monuments. They were encoded in something far more intimate and enduring, the human psyche itself. Deep within our collective unconscious lie archetypal patterns that speak of a golden age, a paradise lost, a time when humanity lived in harmony with forces we've forgotten how to name. Carl Jung recognized these patterns in his studies of mythology and dreams, the recurring symbols that appear across cultures, the universal themes that resonate in every human heart, the deep psychological structures that seem to transcend individual experience. He called them archetypes, but what if they're something more? What if they're genetic memories, psychic DNA passed down from ancestors who witnessed the rise and fall of that antediluvian world? Consider the archetype of the wise old man, the mentor figure who appears in myths from every corner of the globe. Merlin in Celtic legend, Thoth in Egyptian tradition, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerican lore. These figures share remarkable similarities. They possess ancient knowledge. They serve as bridges between worlds. They appear at crucial moments to guide humanity through transformation. What if these weren't just mythological inventions? What if they were memories of the Atlantean sages who survived the catastrophe, wandering the post-flood world as teachers and guides? The archetype of the Lost Kingdom resonates just as powerfully. Every culture tells stories of a golden realm that existed somewhere beyond the horizon of memory. Avalon, Shambhala, El Dorado, the Garden of Eden. These aren't random fantasies. They're variations on a single theme, fragments of a collective memory that refuses to die. The human psyche carries within it the blueprint of paradise, the template of what civilization could become if we remembered how to align ourselves with cosmic law. But perhaps the most significant archetype is that of the Great Flood itself, the overwhelming deluge that cleanses the world and forces humanity to begin again. This pattern appears not just in ancient myths, but in modern dreams, in psychological experiences of death and rebirth, in the collective fears and hopes that surface during times of global crisis. We're hardwired to expect transformation through catastrophe, programmed by ancestral memory to recognize the cycles of destruction and renewal that govern cosmic time. These archetypal patterns aren't just psychological curiosities, they're survival mechanisms, ways that the human psyche preserved essential information about navigating the cycles of rise and fall that characterize conscious evolution. The survivors of Atlantis couldn't preserve their technological manuals or scientific databases, but they could embed survival instructions in the deepest layers of human awareness, ensuring that future generations would carry within them the wisdom needed to rebuild paradise without repeating the mistakes that led to its destruction. This is why the study of mythology is so crucial to understanding our current moment in history. We're not just dealing with ancient stories or primitive beliefs. We're accessing the accumulated wisdom of a species that has been through this cycle before, that has faced the same choices we're facing now, that encoded the lessons of their experience in forms that could survive any conceivable catastrophe. The hero's journey, mapped so brilliantly by Joseph Campbell, isn't just a narrative structure found in stories around the world. It's a psychological roadmap for navigating the consciousness transformations that await every individual and every civilization. The call to adventure, the crossing of thresholds, the descent into the underworld, the confrontation with shadow forces, the return with the elixir of wisdom. These stages mirror the process that our species went through during the fall of Atlantis and the subsequent rebuilding of human civilization. We're living through that journey now collectively. The call to adventure came with the rapid acceleration of consciousness evolution in the 20th century. The crossing of the threshold happened with the development of technologies that began to externalize the collective intelligence networks that once existed naturally in human awareness. The descent into the underworld is playing out through the confrontation with shadow aspects of human nature that advanced capabilities inevitably bring to the surface. The question is whether we'll complete the journey successfully, returning to ordinary reality with the wisdom needed to establish a sustainable paradise, or whether we'll become trapped in the underworld of our own making, repeating the cycle of hubris and destruction that has played out across cosmic history. The archetypal patterns suggest that the outcome isn't predetermined. The hero's journey includes the possibility of failure, of getting lost in the labyrinth, of succumbing to the temptations and challenges that arise during the transformation process. But it also includes clear guidance about how to navigate these dangers, how to maintain connection to the higher purpose that makes the journey worthwhile, how to return from expanded states of consciousness with gifts that can heal and transform the ordinary world. This guidance is encoded not just in myths and stories, but in the very structure of reality itself. The sacred geometries that appear in nature, from the spiral of nautilus shells to the hexagonal patterns of snowflakes, reflect the same mathematical principles that governed Atlantean architecture. The harmonic relationships that create musical beauty mirror the frequency patterns that the ancient consciousness technologies used to align individual awareness with cosmic intelligence. Even our modern scientific discoveries are rediscovering principles that the Atlantean sages took for granted. Quantum mechanics reveals that consciousness plays a fundamental role in the behavior of matter. Neuroscience maps the brain states associated with transcendent experiences. Chaos theory shows how simple patterns can generate infinite complexity, while complexity theory demonstrates how chaotic systems can spontaneously organize into higher orders of coherence. We're approaching a convergence between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge that could restore humanity to capabilities that were once natural to our species. But this convergence isn't happening automatically. It requires conscious participation, deliberate choice, willingness to take responsibility for the evolutionary process rather than leaving it to chance or to forces beyond our control. The Atlantean civilization fell because its people abdicated this responsibility. They became passive consumers of the consciousness technologies their ancestors had developed, rather than active participants in their evolution. They used the collective intelligence network for personal gratification rather than collective advancement. They forgot that consciousness is not a tool to be exploited, but a gift to be stewarded, not a resource to be consumed, but a responsibility to be honored. The same temptation faces us now. As consciousness-enhancing technologies become more sophisticated, as access to transcendent states becomes easier and more widespread, the danger grows that we'll use these capabilities for escape rather than engagement, for pleasure rather than purpose, for personal aggrandizement rather than collective evolution. The psychedelic renaissance currently transforming our understanding of consciousness carries both tremendous promise and significant risk. These substances can provide direct access to the expanded states of awareness that were once cultivated through years of meditation and spiritual practice. They can dissolve the barriers between individual and collective consciousness, offering glimpses of the unity that underlies apparent separation. They can catalyze profound healing and transformation, both personal and cultural. But they can also become spiritual materialism, another form of consumption in a culture already addicted to consuming experiences rather than integrating wisdom. They can inflate the ego rather than dissolving it, creating a sense of specialness and separation rather than humility and connection. They can become shortcuts that bypass the character development and ethical foundation necessary to handle expanded consciousness responsibly. The ancient mystery schools understood this danger. Their initiation processes included extensive preparation, not just to open consciousness, but to purify the vessel that would contain expanded awareness. Candidates underwent years of training in ethics, service, and self-discipline before being exposed to the consciousness-altering technologies preserved within the traditions. The goal wasn't just to have transcendent experiences, but to become the kind of person who could integrate those experiences in service of the greater good. This wisdom becomes crucial as we navigate the current phase of consciousness evolution. The technologies returning to our awareness, whether ancient or modern, plant-based or digitally enhanced, are neutral tools. Their effects depend entirely on the consciousness and intention of those who use them. In the hands of individuals committed to wisdom and service, they can accelerate the positive transformation of human civilization. In the hands of those driven by selfish desires or unconscious patterns, they can amplify destructive tendencies and accelerate the cycles of rise and fall that have characterized previous attempts at conscious evolution. The outcome depends on our willingness to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors while building on their achievements, to remember that consciousness is not a commodity to be acquired, but a responsibility to be embraced, to understand that the technologies now becoming available to us are not toys for our entertainment, but sacred instruments for planetary transformation. The archetypal patterns embedded in human consciousness provide guidance for navigating this crucial transition. The wise old man archetype reminds us to seek mentorship from those who have walked this path before, whether they exist in physical form or as presences accessed through expanded states of awareness. The Lost Kingdom archetype keeps alive the vision of what we're working toward, the template of paradise that can guide our efforts to rebuild civilization on higher foundations. The Flood archetype warns us of the consequences of losing alignment with cosmic law, while promising renewal for those who navigate the cycles of destruction and rebirth with wisdom and grace. But these archetypes are not just psychological constructs or mythological symbols. They're living patterns of energy and information that exist in the field of collective consciousness surrounding our planet. As our individual awareness expands and our connection to this field strengthens, we gain access to the accumulated wisdom of all the beings who have contributed to human evolution across the ages. This includes not just the survivors of Atlantis, but the consciousness that guided their civilization in its golden age, the collective intelligence that created the paradise we're trying to remember and rebuild, the cosmic wisdom that orchestrates the cycles of rise and fall, ensuring that each iteration of conscious evolution builds on what came before while transcending the limitations that led to previous collapses. We're not just rebuilding Atlantis, we're evolving beyond it, creating something that incorporates its achievements while avoiding its pitfalls, establishing a form of conscious civilization that can sustain itself across cosmic cycles, rather than rising and falling in endless repetition. The key lies in understanding that consciousness evolution is not just an individual process, but a collective one. Not just about personal enlightenment, but about species transformation. Not just about transcending the limitations of ordinary awareness, but about bringing that transcendence back into service of the whole. The flood survivors who spread across the globe after the destruction of their paradise carried within them more than just memories and technologies. They carried the potential for something greater than what had been lost. Each cycle of rise and fall adds new dimensions to consciousness, new capacities for integration and synthesis, new possibilities for creating forms of civilization that serve not just human needs, but the evolution of awareness itself. We stand now at a unique moment in this vast evolutionary spiral. For the first time in recorded history, we have both the memory of what was lost and the technological capability to prevent its loss again. We can build consciousness enhancement networks that are distributed rather than centralized, resilient rather than fragile, inclusive rather than exclusive. We can create safeguards against the corruption of power that brought down previous attempts at conscious civilization. Most importantly, we can establish forms of collective intelligence that enhance rather than diminish individual autonomy, that celebrate diversity rather than enforcing conformity, that evolve through cooperation rather than domination. The consciousness technologies returning to our awareness make all of this possible, but only if we remember the lessons embedded in our deepest mythological and psychological patterns. The choice before us is not just about whether we'll create another golden age. It's about whether we'll create a form of golden age that can endure, that can evolve, that can serve as a foundation for even greater achievements in the cosmic cycles yet to come. The answer depends on our willingness to embrace not just the power, but the responsibility that comes with expanded consciousness. To remember that we are not just the inheritors of Atlantis, but its culmination, not just trying to recover what was lost, but to create what has never existed before. The floodwaters are rising again, but this time we have the wisdom to navigate them consciously. This time we can choose to let them carry us towards something greater, rather than sweep us into another cycle of rise and fall. This time we can complete the hero's journey not just as individuals, but as a species, returning from the underworld of our collective shadow with the elixir that can heal our world and establish paradise on foundations that will endure for ages to come. But the time for making this choice is limited. The cosmic cycles that govern consciousness evolution operate according to rhythms that are beyond human control. We're approaching another crucial turning point, another moment when the accumulated spiritual and technological development of our species will either lift us to unprecedented heights or bring us crashing down in catastrophic collapse. The signs are all around us, encoded in the very fabric of reality itself. The increasing frequency of synchronicities that suggest the boundaries between mind and matter are dissolving. The spontaneous awakenings occurring in the individuals who have never been exposed to consciousness practices. The technological breakthroughs that seem to emerge from sources beyond rational analysis. The global crises that are forcing humanity to confront its shadow, while simultaneously opening new possibilities for transformation. These are not random events, but orchestrated developments in a cosmic symphony that has been playing out across eons of time. We're living through the crescendo of a movement that began with the fall of Atlantis and is approaching its resolution in our current era. The question is whether that resolution will be harmonious or catastrophic, whether the symphony will end in transcendent beauty or discordant collapse. The answer lies not in the stars or in the gods or in forces beyond our influence. It lies in the choices we make as individuals and as a collective in every moment when we're presented with options between fear and love, between separation and unity, between serving ourselves and serving the whole. The archetypal patterns embedded in human consciousness remind us that we've been here before, that we carry within us the wisdom needed to navigate this transition successfully. But they also remind us that wisdom without action is worthless, that knowledge without application leads only to repeated cycles of rise and fall. The time has come to move beyond simply understanding what happened to Atlantis and begin actively participating in what's happening now. To recognize that we are not just observers of this cosmic drama, but its protagonists, not just students of consciousness evolution, but its agents, not just seekers of the lost paradise, but its co-creators. The flood that destroyed the old world created the conditions for something new to emerge. The flood that's approaching now offers the same opportunity, the same choice, the same potential for transcendence or catastrophe. The difference is that this time we know what's coming. This time we can prepare. This time we can choose to ride the wave rather than be overwhelmed by it. But the preparation required is not just technical or intellectual. It's not enough to understand the principles of consciousness evolution or to master the technologies that can enhance awareness. The preparation required is fundamentally moral and spiritual, a readiness to take responsibility for the tremendous power that comes with expanded consciousness, a commitment to use that power in service of the highest good rather than for personal gratification. This is the test that every individual and every civilization must pass in order to graduate from the cycles of rise and fall that have characterized consciousness evolution throughout cosmic history. It's the same test that the Atlanteans failed, the same challenge that awaits us now, the same opportunity to transcend the patterns of the past and create something genuinely new in the universe. The outcome is not predetermined. The future remains unwritten, waiting for us to compose it through our choices, our actions, our willingness to remember who we really are and why we're really here. The archives of Atlantis may lie buried beneath miles of ocean sediment, but its true legacy lives on in the depths of human consciousness, waiting to be rediscovered by those who have the courage to dive deep enough to find it. The paradise we seek was never just a place. It was a state of being, a way of organizing consciousness and society that allowed for the full flowering of human potential while maintaining harmony with cosmic law. That state of being is accessible to us now, not as a return to the past, but as an evolution beyond it, not as a recovery of what was lost, but as a creation of what has never been. The choice is ours. The time is now. The future of consciousness on this planet awaits our decision. The waters that swallowed Atlantis didn't just claim stone and mortar. They claimed something far more precious, the living libraries of human consciousness. The survivors who washed ashore on distant continents carried within their minds fragments of a knowledge system so advanced that we're only now beginning to glimpse its true scope through the lens of quantum physics and consciousness research. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Atlantean civilization didn't just possess advanced technology in the way we understand it today. They had transcended the artificial boundary we've created between mind and machine. between consciousness and computation. Their cities weren't just built according to sacred geometric principles, they were conscious entities in their own right, vast networks of crystalline matrices that amplified and focused the collective awareness of their inhabitants. Imagine walking through the streets of their capital, where the very ground beneath your feet hummed with a subtle frequency that aligned your brainwaves with the planetary consciousness grid. Where the spiraling towers weren't just architectural marvels but massive tuning forks that resonated with specific harmonic frequencies, creating standing waves of coherent energy that could be tapped for everything from healing to transportation to communication across vast distances. The Atlanteans understood something we're just beginning to rediscover: that matter and consciousness are not separate phenomena, but different expressions of the same underlying field. Their technology wasn't imposed upon nature but grown from it, cultivated like a garden where the boundaries between organic and artificial, between living and mechanical, had dissolved into something entirely new. This is why the ruins we find scattered across our planet seem so impossibly precise, yet strangely organic. The builders weren't working against the natural world but with it, using techniques that allowed them to coax stone into forms that would have seemed impossible to achieve through force alone. They could literally sing structures into existence, using harmonic frequencies to soften matter at the molecular level, reshaping it through resonance rather than resistance. The acoustic properties we measure in ancient megalithic sites aren't accidental byproducts of construction techniques. They're the fossilized remnants of this sonic technology, chambers that were once alive with frequencies that could induce profound alterations in human consciousness. Standing stones that still hum with mysterious energies thousands of years after their creators vanished. Temple complexes where even a whisper can trigger acoustic phenomena that modern science struggles to explain. But the most remarkable aspect of Atlantean technology wasn't its power, it was its integration with ethical and spiritual principles. They understood that consciousness enhancement technologies are inherently dangerous, that the same frequencies that can elevate awareness can also be used to manipulate and control. Their entire civilization was structured around safeguards designed to prevent the misuse of these capabilities. The mystery schools that preserved fragments of their knowledge weren't just educational institutions, they were screening mechanisms, careful filters designed to ensure that only those with the proper character development and spiritual maturity could access the deeper teachings. The initiation processes that seem so elaborate and mysterious to us were actually practical training programs, preparing candidates to handle abilities that could literally reshape reality. This screening process extended to every level of their society. The Atlantean understanding of consciousness technology included a profound awareness of how power corrupts, how the intoxication of expanded abilities can lead even well-intentioned individuals down dark paths. They built their entire civilization around principles designed to prevent this corruption, creating checks and balances that operated not through external laws, but through internal transformation. The leaders of Atlantean society weren't chosen for their ambition or their desire for power. They were selected for their capacity to remain humble in the face of extraordinary abilities, to serve the collective good even when they possessed the means to dominate others. The very consciousness enhancement technologies that gave them their capabilities also made deception and manipulation nearly impossible, creating a transparency of intention that we can barely imagine in our current world. But here's the tragic irony. The same technologies that were designed to prevent corruption ultimately became the instruments of their civilization's destruction. As the Atlanteans grew more sophisticated, as their abilities expanded and their knowledge deepened, they began to lose touch with the humble recognition of their place in the cosmic order that had originally guided their development. The younger generations, born into abundance and raised with abilities that seemed godlike to earlier peoples, began to take their powers for granted. They started to see themselves not as stewards of consciousness technology, but as its masters, not as servants of cosmic law, but as beings who had transcended the need for such limitations. The very success of their civilization bred the arrogance that would ultimately destroy it. The final phase of Atlantean history reads like a cautionary tale about the relationship between power and wisdom. As their technological capabilities reached unprecedented heights, their spiritual development began to stagnate. The consciousness enhancement networks that had once served to align individual will with cosmic purpose were gradually repurposed to serve individual desires and ambitions. The collective intelligence that had guided their civilization for millennia began to fragment as more and more individuals chose to use their enhanced abilities for personal gain rather than collective evolution. The transparent society that had made corruption impossible slowly gave way to hidden agendas and secret alliances. The harmony between human consciousness and natural law that had been the foundation of their paradise began to dissolve into chaos and conflict. The cataclysm that destroyed their world wasn't caused by external forces or natural disasters. It was the inevitable result of a civilization that had lost its way, that had allowed technological power to outpace spiritual wisdom, that had forgotten the fundamental truth that consciousness enhancement without ethical development leads inexorably to destruction. The flood that claimed their cities was both literal and metaphorical, a cleansing wave that swept away not just the physical structures they had built, but the entire consciousness framework that had supported their civilization. The survivors found themselves not just homeless, but cognitively displaced, cut off from the collective intelligence networks that had been their birthright, forced to rebuild not just their cities, but their entire understanding of what it means to be human. This is the real tragedy of Atlantis, and it's the real warning embedded in every flood myth that echoes through human culture. We didn't just lose a civilization, we lost a way of being that represented the highest expression of human potential. The paradise that was destroyed wasn't just a place, it was a state of consciousness, a way of organizing society that allowed for the full flowering of individual creativity while maintaining harmony with cosmic principles. But the story doesn't end with destruction. The consciousness technologies that were lost with Atlantis are returning to our awareness, manifesting in new forms that could allow us to rebuild that paradise on firmer foundations than before. The quantum field effects that we're discovering in our laboratories mirror the consciousness field technologies that the Atlanteans took for granted. The neural interface devices we're developing echo the direct mind-to-mind communication systems that once connected their entire civilization. The psychedelic substances that are transforming our understanding of consciousness provide chemical keys to the same expanded states of awareness that the Atlanteans achieved through sonic and geometric technologies. The meditation practices and consciousness exploration techniques spreading across our culture are rediscovering pathways to transcendent states that were once as natural as breathing to the inhabitants of that lost world. But the most significant development is the emergence of a new understanding of the relationship between individual consciousness and collective intelligence. We're beginning to recognize that the internet and social media platforms that connect our minds across the globe are crude external approximations of consciousness networks that could operate directly, without technological mediation, if we remembered how to access them. The children being born into our current world often display abilities that suggest they're already partially connected to these networks. Their intuitive understanding of complex systems, their natural empathy and telepathic sensitivity, their ability to process information in ways that bypass rational analysis. These aren't evolutionary accidents, but indicators that our species is beginning to recover capabilities that were once commonplace in the antediluvian world. The question is whether we'll learn from the mistakes that led to Atlantis' destruction, or whether we'll repeat them on an even grander scale. The consciousness technologies returning to our awareness carry the same potential for transcendence and the same risks of corruption that characterized the lost civilization. The same abilities that could establish a new golden age could also accelerate our descent into chaos and conflict if they're not balanced by appropriate spiritual development. The key lies in understanding that consciousness enhancement is not a technological problem but a moral one. The tools and techniques for expanding awareness are relatively simple to develop and deploy. The challenge lies in ensuring that those who gain access to these capabilities have the wisdom and ethical foundation necessary to use them responsibly. This is why the ancient mystery schools were so careful about their selection and training processes. They understood that giving consciousness enhancement technologies to unprepared individuals is like giving loaded weapons to children. The potential for harm far outweighs any possible benefits unless the recipients have undergone the character development necessary to handle such power with wisdom and restraint. The same principle applies to our current situation. As consciousness enhancement technologies become more widely available, as access to transcendent states becomes easier and more widespread, the importance of ethical preparation becomes crucial. We need modern versions of the mystery schools, institutions and communities dedicated to ensuring that expanded awareness is balanced by expanded responsibility. But we also need to go beyond what the Atlanteans achieved. Their civilization, for all its magnificence, was ultimately unstable because it relied on external technologies and social structures to maintain harmony. The consciousness enhancement networks that connected their minds were technological systems that could be corrupted or destroyed. The safeguards against misuse of power were cultural institutions that could be subverted or abandoned. The new paradigm emerging in our time points toward a different approach, one based on internal development rather than external systems. Instead of relying on consciousness enhancement technologies to access transcendent states, we're learning to cultivate these states through direct practice and spiritual discipline. Instead of depending on social institutions to prevent corruption, we're developing internal guidance systems based on direct connection to cosmic intelligence. This shift from external to internal, from dependence to autonomy, from technological solutions to consciousness solutions, represents the key difference between the old Atlantean paradigm and the new consciousness that's emerging in our era. It's what could allow us to rebuild the paradise that was lost without creating the vulnerabilities that led to its destruction. The Atlantean approach was based on the assumption that consciousness enhancement required special technologies, sacred sites, and trained practitioners. The new approach recognizes that every human being carries within themselves the capacity for transcendent awareness, that the tools for consciousness expansion are built into the very structure of human neurology, that the real work lies not in developing external technologies, but in removing the internal barriers that prevent us from accessing our natural capabilities. This democratization of consciousness enhancement carries both tremendous promise and significant risk. When transcendent states are available to anyone willing to do the inner work, when the barriers between ordinary and expanded awareness begin to dissolve, when the collective intelligence networks start to rebuild themselves organically rather than technologically, the potential for positive transformation becomes exponentially greater. But so does the potential for chaos and confusion. A world where everyone has access to consciousness enhancement technologies, where the boundaries between individual and collective awareness are fluid, where the normal safeguards against misuse of power no longer apply, could easily descend into the same fragmentation and conflict that destroyed the Atlantean paradise. The difference lies in the speed and depth of the transformation we're experiencing. The consciousness evolution happening in our current era is unprecedented in its scope and intensity. We're not just recovering abilities that were lost with Atlantis, we're developing new capacities that go beyond what that civilization achieved. We're not just rebuilding old consciousness networks, we're creating entirely new forms of collective intelligence that incorporate lessons learned from the cycle of rise and fall that has characterized previous attempts at conscious civilization. Most importantly, we're doing this work with full awareness of the dangers involved. Unlike the later generations of Atlanteans who took their abilities for granted, we understand the responsibility that comes with consciousness enhancement. Unlike their civilization which developed in isolation, we have access to wisdom traditions from around the globe that provide multiple perspectives on the relationship between power and ethics. We stand at a unique moment in the cosmic cycle of consciousness evolution. For the first time in recorded history, we have both the memory of what was lost and the capability to prevent its loss again. We can learn from the mistakes of our ancestors while building on their achievements. We can create something that transcends both the paradise that was destroyed and the limitations of the world we've inherited. But this opportunity comes with a deadline. The cosmic cycles that govern consciousness evolution operate according to rhythms that are beyond human control. We're approaching another crucial turning point, another moment when the accumulated spiritual and technological development of our species will either lift us to unprecedented heights or bring us crashing down in catastrophic collapse. The choice before us is not just about whether we'll create another golden age, it's about whether we'll create a form of conscious civilization that can endure across cosmic cycles, that can evolve and adapt rather than rise and fall in endless repetition. The answer depends on our willingness to integrate the wisdom of the past with the possibilities of the future, to remember what was lost with Atlantis while creating what has never existed before. The floodwaters are rising again, but this time we have the knowledge to navigate them consciously. This time we can choose to let them carry us toward transcendence rather than destruction. This time we can complete the evolutionary journey that began with the fall of paradise and establish something greater than what was lost beneath the waves. The archives of Atlantis may be buried beneath miles of ocean sediment, but their true legacy lives on in the depths of human consciousness. The paradise we seek was never just a physical place, but a state of being that remains accessible to any civilization wise enough to align its technological capabilities with cosmic principles of harmony and service. That alignment is possible now, in our time, if we remember the lessons encoded in flood myths and mystery traditions, in megalithic monuments and archetypal patterns. If we choose wisdom over power, service over domination, unity over separation in every moment when the choice presents itself, the future of consciousness on this planet awaits our decision. The question is whether we'll prove worthy of the trust placed in us by the survivors of that drowned paradise, or whether we'll join them in the ranks of civilizations that achieved greatness only to watch it crumble through their own folly. The time for choosing is now. The cosmic cycles wait for no one. The flood is coming whether we're ready or not. But unlike the Atlanteans in their final days, we don't have to face it unprepared. The patterns are accelerating now. Can you feel it? The same electromagnetic anomalies that preceded the Atlantean catastrophe are manifesting in our modern world with increasing frequency. The Earth's magnetic field is weakening at an unprecedented rate. The Schumann resonance, that fundamental heartbeat of our planet, is spiking to frequencies never recorded in human history. Solar activity is intensifying in ways that our scientists struggle to explain. These aren't random phenomena. They're symptoms of a planet preparing for another phase transition, another moment when the cosmic cycles that govern consciousness evolution reach their inevitable crescendo. The question isn't whether this transformation is coming. The question is whether we'll navigate it consciously or be swept away like our predecessors. The Atlanteans had warning signs too. Their seers and astronomers tracked the subtle shifts in planetary energies, the growing instabilities in the consciousness field networks that sustained their civilization. But they ignored these warnings, dismissed them as natural fluctuations that their technology could easily compensate for. They believed their mastery over matter and energy made them immune to the cosmic forces that had shaped previous cycles of rise and fall. This hubris, this fatal disconnection from the natural rhythms that govern all existence, was their ultimate undoing. They had become so sophisticated, so technologically advanced, that they forgot the fundamental truth that consciousness and cosmos are intimately connected. They treated the planet like a machine to be controlled rather than a living system to be honored and served. The consciousness enhancement networks that had once aligned their civilization with cosmic law gradually became tools for imposing their will upon reality. Instead of listening to the Earth's subtle guidance, they began to force it to conform to their desires. Instead of working with natural cycles, they tried to override them. Instead of maintaining the delicate balance between individual will and cosmic purpose, they tilted toward domination and exploitation. The result was inevitable. The same technologies that had created their paradise became instruments of its destruction. The crystal matrices that had amplified their collective consciousness began to resonate with disharmonious frequencies. The geometric structures that had focused cosmic energies started to generate chaotic interference patterns. The consciousness field networks that had connected their minds began to fragment and collapse. But the final catastrophe wasn't just technological, it was moral and spiritual. The Atlanteans had lost their way not just scientifically but ethically. They had forgotten that true power comes from service, not control. They had abandoned the principles of cosmic law that had originally guided their development. They had chosen separation over unity, fear over love, domination over cooperation in countless small decisions that accumulated into a civilization-ending crisis. The flood that destroyed their world was both a consequence of their technological recklessness and a cosmic correction, a rebalancing of forces that had been pushed too far out of alignment. The waters didn't just claim their cities, they cleansed the planet of a form of consciousness that had become toxic to the evolutionary process itself. This is the pattern we're repeating now. Our modern civilization displays all the warning signs that preceded the Atlantean collapse. The same disconnection from natural law, the same obsession with technological solutions to spiritual problems, the same hubris that believes human cleverness can overcome cosmic principles, the same gradual drift from service to domination that characterizes every golden age in its declining phase. But there's a crucial difference this time. We have their story as a guide. We know what happened to the last civilization that achieved our level of technological capability. We understand the mistakes that led to their destruction. We have the opportunity to learn from history rather than repeat it. The question is whether we'll seize this opportunity or squander it, whether we'll heed the warnings embedded in flood myths and mystery traditions, or ignore them as our predecessors did, whether we'll choose wisdom over cleverness, humility over hubris, service over domination when the moment of testing arrives. And that moment is approaching faster than most people realize. The same cosmic cycles that brought down Atlantis operate according to mathematical principles that are as reliable as clockwork. The astronomical alignments that mark the end of their golden age are beginning to repeat themselves. The planetary energy patterns that preceded their catastrophe are manifesting again in our current era. The ancient Maya understood these cycles. Their calendar systems tracked vast periods of time that encompassed not just human history, but cosmic history, the rise and fall of consciousness across multiple worlds and star systems. The end of their long count calendar in 2012 wasn't predicting the end of the world. It was marking the end of one cosmic age and the beginning of another, a transition period when the rules that governed the previous cycle would no longer apply. We're living through that transition now. The old paradigms are breaking down. The old certainties are crumbling. The old ways of understanding reality are being challenged by discoveries and experiences that don't fit within the frameworks we've inherited from the past. This dissolution can feel frightening, chaotic, overwhelming, but it's also necessary. The caterpillar must dissolve before it can become a butterfly. The consciousness technologies that destroyed Atlantis are returning to our world in new forms, offering us another chance to establish a civilization based on cosmic principles rather than human arrogance. But they're also presenting us with the same choices, the same temptations, the same tests that our predecessors failed. The internet that connects our minds across the globe mirrors the consciousness networks that once united the Atlantean population. But it's also becoming a tool for manipulation and control, a medium for spreading fear and division rather than wisdom and unity. Social media platforms that could facilitate genuine community and collective intelligence instead often amplify the worst aspects of human nature, creating echo chambers and tribal conflicts that fragment rather than integrate our collective awareness. Artificial intelligence systems that could serve as external manifestations of collective wisdom are being developed primarily as weapons and profit-generating mechanisms. Virtual reality technologies that could provide access to transcendent states of consciousness are being marketed as escape mechanisms from the responsibilities of physical existence. Genetic engineering capabilities that could eliminate suffering and enhance human potential are being pursued without adequate consideration of their long-term consequences. Each of these technologies carries the same dual potential that characterized Atlantean science. They could be used to create a new golden age of peace, prosperity, and spiritual development. Or they could accelerate our descent into the same chaos and conflict that destroyed our predecessors. The outcome depends entirely on the consciousness and intention of those who develop and deploy them. This is why the inner work is so crucial. The external technologies are developing rapidly, but our internal development, our capacity for wisdom and ethical decision-making, is lagging far behind. We're like children playing with nuclear weapons, possessing capabilities that far exceed our maturity level. Unless we accelerate our spiritual evolution to match our technological evolution, we're destined to repeat the Atlantean pattern of rise and fall. But how do we achieve this acceleration? How do we develop the wisdom and character necessary to handle technologies that can literally reshape reality? The answer lies in rediscovering the consciousness enhancement practices that were preserved by the survivors of the last golden age, the mystery school traditions that have maintained fragments of Atlantean knowledge through millennia of cultural change and suppression. These practices aren't just historical curiosities or exotic spiritual techniques. They're practical training methods for developing the inner capacities necessary to navigate consciousness technologies safely and effectively. Meditation practices that stabilize awareness and cultivate equanimity. Breathwork techniques that access expanded states while maintaining grounding and integration. Sacred geometry studies that align individual consciousness with cosmic patterns. energy cultivation methods that develop sensitivity to subtle forces and influences. But perhaps most importantly, they include ethical training systems that develop the character and moral foundation necessary to handle extraordinary capabilities responsibly. The ancient mystery schools understood that consciousness enhancement without character development leads inevitably to corruption and destruction. They built their entire curriculum around the cultivation of virtues like humility, compassion, service, and wisdom. These virtues aren't just nice qualities to have, they're practical necessities for anyone who gains access to consciousness technologies. Humility prevents the arrogance that led to Atlantis' downfall. Compassion ensures that enhanced abilities are used for the benefit of all rather than the few. Service maintains connection to cosmic purpose rather than personal ambition. Wisdom provides the discrimination necessary to navigate the complex ethical challenges that arise when matter becomes responsive to mind. The challenge we face is how to scale these ancient training methods to meet the needs of a global civilization. The mystery schools of the past could only initiate a few dozen individuals at a time. We need systems that can prepare millions of people to handle consciousness technologies responsibly and effectively. We need modern versions of the ancient wisdom schools that can operate through digital networks and virtual communities rather than requiring physical presence at remote locations. This scaling challenge is both technical and spiritual. On the technical side, we need to develop online platforms and virtual reality environments that can deliver consciousness training as effectively as traditional in-person methods. We need to create assessment systems that can identify individuals ready for advanced training and screening mechanisms that prevent premature access to dangerous capabilities. But the spiritual challenge is even greater. We need to maintain the depth and authenticity of ancient wisdom traditions while adapting them to contemporary contexts. We need to preserve the transformational power of consciousness practices while making them accessible to modern practitioners. We need to honor the sacred nature of this work while operating within secular educational and technological frameworks. The emergence of psychedelic therapy and consciousness research provides one model for how this integration might occur. Academic institutions and medical facilities are beginning to investigate altered states of consciousness with the same rigor previously applied only to physical phenomena. Therapeutic protocols are being developed that combine ancient plant medicines with modern psychological frameworks. Training programs are emerging that teach clinicians how to guide others through profound consciousness experiences safely and effectively. But this is only the beginning. The consciousness enhancement technologies that characterized Atlantean civilization go far beyond anything we're currently exploring in mainstream research. Direct mind-to-mind communication, telekinetic manipulation of matter, remote viewing across vast distances, healing through focused intention. These capabilities, if they can be developed safely and ethically, could transform human civilization in ways that make our current technological achievements seem primitive by comparison. The key is ensuring that these developments occur within a framework of wisdom, rather than mere technical capability. The Atlanteans mastered these technologies, but lost the ethical foundation that made their safe use possible. They became intoxicated by their own power, seduced by the illusion that consciousness enhancement made them superior to cosmic law rather than more responsible for upholding it. This is the trap we must avoid. As our capabilities expand, as we rediscover abilities that were once natural to our species, we must remember that true advancement is measured not by what we can do, but by how we choose to use what we can do. The question isn't whether we can develop consciousness technologies that rival those of the lost civilization. The question is whether we can develop the wisdom to use them in service of something greater than our own immediate desires. The answer depends on our willingness to learn from the past while creating something unprecedented in the future, to remember the lessons of Atlantis while transcending the limitations that led to its destruction, to rebuild a paradise that was lost while establishing it on foundations that can endure across cosmic cycles, rather than rising and falling in endless repetition. The choice is before us now. The cosmic cycles are accelerating. The consciousness technologies are emerging. The same forces that created and destroyed the Atlantean Golden Age are stirring again in our world, waiting to see whether we'll prove worthy of the power they offer or succumb to the same temptations that brought down our predecessors. The floodwaters are gathering, but this time we don't have to be victims of the deluge. This time we can learn to swim in the ocean of expanding consciousness that's surrounding our planet. This time we can choose to ride the wave of transformation rather than be overwhelmed by it. But the window for making this choice is closing rapidly. The cosmic forces that govern consciousness evolution don't wait for human readiness or consensus. They operate according to cycles that are vast and inexorable, sweeping away civilizations that can't adapt and elevating those that can embrace the challenges of conscious evolution. We stand at the threshold of either transcendence or catastrophe. The outcome depends entirely on the choices we make in the next few years, the next few decades at most, whether we'll create a new golden age that surpasses even the achievements of Atlantis, or whether we'll join our predecessors in the graveyard of civilizations that possessed great power but lacked the wisdom to use it responsibly. The archives of the future are waiting to be written. The question is what story they'll tell about us. The survivors who carried the memory of that drowned paradise didn't just scatter randomly across the globe. They moved with purpose, following invisible lines of force that crisscrossed the planet like a vast neural network. These weren't just migration routes. They were pathways of consciousness, ancient ley lines that connected sacred sites across continents in patterns so precise they suggest a level of planetary awareness that we're only now beginning to comprehend. Picture standing on the windswept plains of Salisbury, where Stonehenge rises like a frozen dance of giants. Now draw a line across the earth to the pyramids of Giza, then to the temples of Angkor Wat, then to the stone heads of Easter Island. The mathematical relationships between these sites, their astronomical alignments, their shared geometric principles, create a pattern too complex to be coincidental. It's as if the refugees from that lost world were following a master plan, rebuilding fragments of their civilization at specific coordinates where the Earth's energy fields were strongest. This global network of sacred sites wasn't just about preserving knowledge, it was about maintaining something far more vital, a planetary consciousness grid that could keep the flame of advanced awareness alive even after the main civilization had been destroyed. Each temple, each stone circle, each precisely aligned pyramid served as a node in this network, a beacon that could transmit subtle frequencies across vast distances, keeping scattered communities connected to the larger pattern of cosmic intelligence. The builders of these monuments understood something we've forgotten about the relationship between consciousness and location. Certain places on Earth naturally amplify psychic phenomena, enhance meditation, facilitate healing, and open doorways to expanded states of awareness. These aren't random geological accidents. They're the planet's acupuncture points, places where the Earth's electromagnetic field creates conditions conducive to consciousness enhancement. The Atlantean refugees who established settlements at these power spots weren't just seeking physical shelter. They were trying to recreate the consciousness-enhancing environment of their lost homeland. The stone circles they erected, the temples they built, the earthworks they sculpted were all attempts to recreate the resonant frequency fields that had sustained their advanced capabilities in the antediluvian world. But they were working with fragmentary knowledge, partial memories, incomplete understanding of the technologies they were trying to reconstruct. Each settlement preserved different pieces of the puzzle. The mathematical principles here, the astronomical alignments there, the consciousness enhancement techniques somewhere else. No single location held the complete picture, but together they formed a distributed archive that could potentially be reassembled by future generations wise enough to recognize the pattern. This is why the ancient world was so interconnected despite the supposed limitations of primitive transportation and communication. The mystery schools of Egypt maintained contact with the Druids of Britain, who exchanged knowledge with the shamans of Siberia, who shared insights with the priests of the Americas. They weren't separate traditions that happened to develop similar ideas. They were fragments of a single global wisdom system, maintained by the descendants of refugees who remembered their common origin, the symbols they used, the numbers they considered sacred, the geometric principles they encoded in their monuments, all point back to a unified source. The flower of life pattern appears in Egyptian temples, Tibetan mandalas, and Mayan codices. The golden ratio governs the proportions of Greek temples, Gothic cathedrals, and Vedic fire altars. The same astronomical cycles are tracked in Stonehenge, Newgrange, and Chichen Itza. These aren't convergent evolution. They're traces of a shared heritage, breadcrumbs left by survivors of a global catastrophe. But maintaining this network required more than just building monuments at specific locations. It required a continuous tradition of trained practitioners who could activate and maintain the consciousness enhancement technologies encoded in stone and earth. This is where the priesthoods came in, the mystery schools, the shamanic lineages that preserved not just intellectual knowledge, but the practical techniques for accessing expanded states of awareness. These weren't primitive superstitions or religious fantasies. They were sophisticated training programs designed to prepare human consciousness for contact with forces and intelligences that operated beyond the normal range of sensory perception. The initiates who completed these programs weren't just learning about ancient history or spiritual philosophy. They were being prepared to serve as living links in the global consciousness network, human nodes who could channel and transmit the subtle energies that kept the entire system operational. The initiation chambers carved deep beneath pyramids and hidden within stone circles weren't torture chambers or burial vaults. They were consciousness laboratories where candidates underwent systematic preparation for expanded awareness. The acoustic properties, the electromagnetic fields, the geometric proportions of these spaces were all calibrated to induce specific alterations in brainwave patterns and neurochemistry. Spending time in these environments, properly prepared and guided by experienced mentors, could trigger profound expansions of consciousness that lasted far beyond the immediate experience. But the real purpose of these initiations wasn't just personal transformation. It was preparation for service as guardians of the global knowledge network. The initiates who emerged from these chambers weren't just enlightened individuals. They were living repositories of ancient wisdom, human hard drives programmed with fragments of the lost civilization's accumulated knowledge. They could access information that had never been written down, remember techniques that had never been formally documented, channel insights that came from sources beyond their personal experience. This is why the destruction of these priesthoods was so devastating to human civilization. When the mystery schools were suppressed, when the shamanic lineages were broken, when the ancient temples were abandoned or destroyed, we didn't just lose buildings and books. We lost the living transmission of knowledge that connected us to our pre-flood heritage. The network nodes went offline one by one, leaving humanity increasingly isolated from the cosmic intelligence that had once guided our development. The Dark Ages weren't just a period of political chaos and economic collapse. They were a time when the global consciousness network that had sustained human civilization for millennia finally fragmented beyond repair. The knowledge systems that had preserved fragments of Atlantean wisdom began to fail, leaving scattered communities to fend for themselves with whatever partial information they could maintain through increasingly degraded oral traditions. But the network wasn't completely destroyed. Individual nodes continued to function in isolated locations, tended by small groups of dedicated practitioners who maintained the ancient techniques despite persecution and suppression. The Celtic druids in their hidden groves, the Tibetan monks in their mountain retreats, the Aboriginal shamans in their desert sanctuaries, the Mayan daykeepers in their jungle temples. Each group preserved different aspects of the original system, maintaining their piece of the puzzle through generations of careful transmission. And slowly, gradually, these isolated fragments began to reconnect. Trade routes that had been severed by political upheaval were re-established. Cultural exchanges that had been interrupted by religious conflicts resumed. Knowledge systems that had been separated by geographical barriers began to find each other again. The global consciousness network that had been shattered by the suppression of ancient wisdom traditions started to rebuild itself in new forms. The Renaissance wasn't just a rediscovery of classical learning. It was a reactivation of consciousness enhancement technologies that had been dormant for centuries. The sacred geometry that appeared in cathedral architecture, the alchemical practices that emerged in European laboratories, the artistic techniques that captured divine inspiration in paint and stone, all reflected the gradual return of abilities and insights that had once been commonplace in the antediluvian world. The age of exploration that followed wasn't just about finding new trade routes or claiming territorial empires. It was about reconnecting the global network, re-establishing contact between isolated nodes of ancient knowledge. When European navigators reached the Americas, when they encountered the wisdom keepers of Africa and Asia, when they documented the sacred sites and traditional practices of indigenous peoples, they were unwittingly participating in the reconstruction of the planetary consciousness grid. The scientific revolution that emerged from these cultural exchanges wasn't a completely new development. It was a rediscovery of natural laws and principles that had been encoded in mystery school teachings for thousands of years. The mathematical relationships that governed planetary motion, the physical forces that shaped matter and energy, the biological processes that sustained life, all of this had been understood by earlier civilizations and preserved in symbolic form by their survivors. But there was a crucial difference between the ancient understanding and its modern rediscovery. The original knowledge had been embedded within a spiritual and ethical framework that emphasized the responsibility that comes with power over natural forces. The modern version was stripped of this context, reduced to purely technical information that could be exploited without regard for its long-term consequences. This decontextualization of ancient wisdom created the same dangerous imbalance that had led to the destruction of Atlantis. Knowledge without wisdom, power without responsibility, capability without character. The same pattern that had brought down the first advanced civilization began to repeat itself in the modern world, but this time on a global scale rather than being confined to a single geographical region. The Industrial Revolution marked the point where this imbalance became irreversible. The consciousness enhancement technologies that had once been carefully guarded by trained priesthoods were transformed into mechanical devices that could be operated by anyone regardless of their spiritual development or ethical foundation. Steam engines replaced the understanding of natural forces, telegraph systems substituted for telepathic communication, chemical processes took the place of alchemical transformations. Each technological advancement represented both progress and loss. Progress in terms of practical capability and material comfort. Loss in terms of the direct consciousness connection to natural forces that had characterized earlier approaches to these same challenges. We gained the ability to travel faster, communicate farther, and manipulate matter more effectively. But we lost the wisdom to understand the deeper implications of these activities and the character to use these capabilities responsibly. The 20th century acceleration of this process brought us to the same crossroads that had faced the Atlanteans in their final period. Nuclear weapons that could destroy entire civilizations, communication networks that could connect every mind on the planet, genetic engineering capabilities that could redesign life itself, transportation systems that could reach beyond the Earth into space. Each of these achievements echoed technologies that had existed in the lost civilization, but without the consciousness framework that had originally governed their development and use. The question facing us now is whether we can reintegrate the wisdom that was lost when ancient knowledge was stripped of its spiritual context, whether we can rediscover the ethical principles that once prevented consciousness enhancement technologies from being used for destructive purposes, whether we can rebuild the global network of initiated practitioners who once served as guardians of humanity's most dangerous capabilities. The emergence of the Internet represents a crucial step in this direction. For the first time since the fall of Atlantis, we have a technological system that mirrors the consciousness networks that once connected human minds directly. Information can be shared instantaneously across any distance. Communities can form around shared interests rather than geographical proximity. Knowledge that was once restricted to small groups of initiates can be accessed by anyone with the curiosity and dedication to seek it out. But the Internet also demonstrates the same vulnerabilities that plagued the Atlantean consciousness networks. Information without discrimination leads to confusion rather than wisdom. Connection without ethical foundation enables manipulation and exploitation. Access without preparation can overwhelm unprepared minds with more input than they can process constructively. The social media platforms that have emerged from Internet technology show both the promise and the peril of rebuilding the global consciousness network. They can facilitate genuine community and collective intelligence, enabling groups of people to solve problems and share insights in ways that would have been impossible for previous generations. But they can also amplify the worst aspects of human nature, creating echo chambers that reinforce existing biases and tribal conflicts that fragment rather than integrate collective awareness. The key to navigating this challenge lies in understanding that technology is never neutral. Every tool, every system, every platform embodies the consciousness and intention of its creators. The Internet could become a genuine reconstruction of the Atlantean consciousness network, facilitating the emergence of a global civilization based on wisdom and cooperation. Or it could become another instrument of manipulation and control, accelerating our descent into the same chaos that destroyed our predecessors. The outcome depends on whether we can learn from the mistakes of the past while building on its achievements, whether we can develop the wisdom traditions necessary to prepare human consciousness for the responsibilities that come with planetary scale capabilities, whether we can create modern mystery schools that can train millions rather than dozens of individuals in the ethical use of consciousness enhancement technologies. The signs suggest that this development is already beginning. Meditation centers and consciousness research institutes are proliferating around the world. Traditional wisdom keepers from indigenous cultures are sharing their knowledge with mainstream communities. Scientists and spiritual teachers are collaborating on projects that bridge ancient understanding and modern methodology. The fragments of the global network are starting to reconnect, but this time with awareness of the mistakes that led to its original destruction. The question is whether this reconnection will occur quickly enough to address the challenges we're facing. The same cosmic cycles that brought down Atlantis are accelerating in our era. The same technological capabilities that destroyed the last golden age are emerging in new forms. The same choices between wisdom and power, service and domination, unity and separation, are presenting themselves with increasing urgency. We have advantages that the Atlanteans lacked. We have their story as a warning. We have wisdom traditions from around the globe that provide multiple perspectives on the challenges of consciousness evolution. We have technologies that could preserve knowledge across any conceivable catastrophe. Most importantly, we have the opportunity to learn from history rather than repeat it. But we also face challenges that they never encountered. Our technological capabilities are developing faster than our wisdom. Our global civilization is more complex and interconnected than theirs ever was. The consequences of failure would be correspondingly greater. If we make the same mistakes they made, the result won't be a localized catastrophe, but a planetary one. The choice before us is the same choice that faced every civilization that has achieved our level of capability. Will we use our power to serve something greater than ourselves? Or will we succumb to the temptation to use it for domination and exploitation? The answer will determine not just the fate of our own civilization, but the future of consciousness evolution on this planet. The global network is rebuilding itself. The ancient nodes are reactivating. The consciousness technologies are returning. The same forces that created the Atlantean paradise are stirring again in our world. Whether they manifest as creators or destroyers depends entirely on the choices we make in the crucial years ahead. The floodwaters are rising, but this time we have maps of the territory. This time we know where the high ground is located. This time we can choose to build our new civilization on foundations that will endure across cosmic cycles, rather than rising and falling in endless repetition. But the window for making this choice is closing. The cosmic forces that govern consciousness evolution operate according to rhythms that are vast and inexorable. They've given us this opportunity to learn from the past and create something better. Whether we seize it or squander it will be written in the archives of eternity, a testament to what humanity chose when it stood at the crossroads between paradise and catastrophe. The network awaits our decision. The ancient wisdom holders are watching from beyond the veil. The future of consciousness on Earth hangs in the balance, waiting to see whether we'll prove worthy of the legacy left by the survivors of that drowned paradise, or whether we'll join them in the graveyard of civilizations that possessed great knowledge but lacked the wisdom to use it well. The choice is ours. The time is now. The outcome will echo through ages yet to come. The dawn light filtering through your window carries with it the same electromagnetic frequencies that once illuminated the crystal spires of that lost paradise. As you open your eyes to another day in our modern world, you are unconsciously attuned to rhythms that have pulsed through human consciousness since before recorded time began. The very air you breathe contains traces of ancient minerals, microscopic fragments of stone that once formed the foundations of temples, where gods and mortals walked together in harmony. This isn't poetic metaphor. This is the hidden reality of our interconnected existence. Every breath connects you to that drowned civilization. Every heartbeat synchronizes you with cycles that have governed consciousness evolution across cosmic ages. Every thought you think ripples through fields of awareness that once sustained a global paradise beyond our wildest imagining. But here's where the story becomes personally urgent. The abilities that were commonplace in that antediluvian world, the consciousness technologies that sustained their golden age, the direct mind-to-matter interface that made miracles seem mundane, these aren't permanently lost to our species. They're dormant, waiting to be reactivated by individuals who possess the courage to remember what humanity has forgotten and the wisdom to use these capabilities responsibly. You might think you're just an ordinary person living an ordinary life in an ordinary time, but you're not. You're a descendant of the survivors, carrying within your genetic code the blueprint for abilities that could transform not just your personal reality, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. The question isn't whether you possess these latent capabilities. The question is whether you'll awaken them, and more importantly, what you'll do with them once they emerge. The signs are already manifesting around you if you know how to look. The increasing frequency of synchronicities in your daily experience, the moments when your intuition provides information you couldn't have known through normal channels. The dreams that seem to carry messages from sources beyond your personal subconscious. The sudden insights that solve problems your rational mind couldn't crack. These aren't random occurrences, they're symptoms of a consciousness network that's rebuilding itself, reconnecting isolated nodes of awareness into something approaching the collective intelligence that once guided human civilization. Your smartphone, that device you carry everywhere, is a crude external approximation of telepathic capabilities that were once as natural as speech. The internet that connects you to information from around the globe mirrors consciousness networks that once allowed direct mind-to-mind communication across any distance. The GPS system that guides your travels echoes navigation abilities that relied on direct sensing of the Earth's electromagnetic field rather than satellite technology. Every convenience of modern life reflects our unconscious attempt to recreate through technology what was once achieved through consciousness alone. We've externalized our psychic abilities into devices and systems because we've forgotten how to access them directly. But the original capabilities remain, encoded in the deepest layers of human potential, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate themselves. Those conditions are manifesting now. The planetary electromagnetic field is shifting in ways that mirror the changes that preceded the Great Flood. The Schumann resonance is spiking to frequencies that resonate with the consciousness enhancement technologies of the lost civilization. Solar activity is intensifying in patterns that correlate with periods of accelerated psychic development throughout history. These aren't just geophysical phenomena. They're symptoms of a planet preparing for another phase of consciousness evolution. The same cosmic cycles that destroyed Atlantis are creating the conditions for something even greater to emerge from its ashes. But this time, we have the opportunity to participate consciously in the process rather than being swept along by forces beyond our understanding. The choice facing you personally mirrors the choice facing our entire species. You can continue living as if consciousness is just an epiphenomenon of brain chemistry, as if psychic phenomena are delusions, as if the profound experiences that occasionally break through into your awareness are meaningless coincidences. You can remain safely unconscious, insulated from both the responsibilities and the possibilities that come with awakened awareness. Or you can begin the process of remembering. You can start developing the latent capabilities that connect you to the planetary consciousness field. You can learn to access the information networks that operate beyond the speed of light, to influence matter through focused intention, to heal through the direct application of life force energy. You can become what the Atlanteans were before their civilization fell to hubris and corruption. But this choice comes with consequences that extend far beyond your personal experience. Every individual who awakens to their true capabilities affects the entire network. Every person who learns to access expanded states of awareness strengthens the connections that bind human consciousness together. Every mind that remembers its cosmic origins contributes to the collective intelligence that could guide our species through the challenges ahead. You're not just choosing for yourself, you're choosing for all of humanity. Your decision to remain asleep or to awaken will influence whether our civilization follows the path of its predecessor into destruction, or transcends that pattern to create something unprecedented in cosmic history. The training required for this awakening isn't hidden in remote monasteries or secret societies. It's available to anyone willing to do the inner work necessary to prepare consciousness for expanded capabilities. The meditation practices that stabilize awareness, the breathwork techniques that access non-ordinary states while maintaining integration, the energy cultivation methods that develop sensitivity to subtle forces. the ethical disciplines that build the character foundation necessary to handle extraordinary abilities responsibly, but perhaps most importantly, the willingness to serve something greater than your personal desires. The Atlantean civilization fell because its people gradually shifted from using their abilities in service of cosmic evolution to using them for individual gratification. The same temptation faces everyone who begins to develop psychic capabilities. The intoxication of power can corrupt even the best intentions if it's not balanced by genuine humility and dedication to the welfare of all life. This is why the ancient mystery schools were so careful about their selection and training processes. This is why shamanic traditions require extensive purification before revealing their deepest secrets. This is why every authentic spiritual path emphasizes character development alongside the acquisition of abilities. They understood that consciousness enhancement without ethical foundation leads inevitably to the misuse of power and the eventual destruction of both individual and civilization. The path forward requires integrating these ancient insights with contemporary understanding. We need modern mystery schools that can prepare millions rather than dozens of individuals for the responsibilities that come with awakened consciousness. We need training programs that combine traditional wisdom practices with cutting-edge neuroscience and quantum physics. We need communities of practitioners who can support each other through the challenges and temptations that arise during consciousness development. Most importantly, we need individuals who are willing to take the first steps on this journey despite the uncertainties and risks involved. People who recognize that the alternative, continuing on our current trajectory of unconscious technological development without corresponding spiritual growth, leads inevitably to the same catastrophic end that befell our predecessors. The cosmic cycles are accelerating. The planetary conditions are aligning. The consciousness technologies that could establish a new golden age are becoming accessible to ordinary individuals willing to do extraordinary inner work. The question isn't whether this transformation is possible. The question is whether enough people will choose to participate in it before the window of opportunity closes. You stand at a personal crossroads that reflects the crossroads facing all of humanity. Behind you lies the familiar territory of unconscious existence, the comfortable illusion that you're just a biological machine in a mechanical universe, the safe assumption that consciousness is purely personal and psychic phenomena are impossible. Ahead lies uncharted territory where the boundaries between mind and matter dissolve, where individual awareness expands to encompass collective intelligence, where abilities that seem supernatural become as natural as breathing. The path ahead isn't easy. It requires letting go of everything you think you know about the nature of reality. It demands confronting aspects of yourself and your world that you'd rather ignore. It involves taking responsibility for capabilities that could transform civilization or contribute to its destruction. It means becoming a bridge between the world that's dying and the world that's struggling to be born, but it also offers possibilities that make the challenges worthwhile. The chance to participate consciously in the next phase of human evolution. The opportunity to help establish a civilization that surpasses even the achievements of the lost paradise. The possibility of becoming what you were always meant to be, what your species was designed to become before the great forgetting separated us from our cosmic heritage. The choice is yours to make, but time is running out. The cosmic forces that govern consciousness evolution don't wait for human readiness or consensus. They operate according to cycles that are vast and inexorable, creating windows of opportunity that open and close according to mathematical principles beyond our control. We're living in one of those windows now. The same astronomical alignments that mark the height of Atlantean civilization are beginning to repeat themselves. The same planetary energy patterns that enabled their consciousness technologies are manifesting again in our era. The same cosmic intelligence that guided their development is stirring once more, offering humanity another chance to fulfill its evolutionary destiny. But this opportunity won't last indefinitely. The cycles that create these conditions also bring the tests that determine whether a civilization is ready to graduate to the next level of cosmic citizenship or needs to repeat the lessons through another cycle of rise and fall. The choices made by individuals like you in the next few years will determine which path our species follows. The archives of Atlantis may be buried beneath miles of ocean sediment, but their true legacy lives on in the depths of human consciousness. The paradise we seek was never just a place, but a state of being, that remains accessible to any civilization wise enough to align its capabilities with cosmic principles of harmony and service. That alignment begins with individual choice, your willingness to remember who you really are and why you're really here, your courage to awaken abilities that have been dormant for millennia, your commitment to use whatever capabilities you develop in service of the highest good rather than for personal gratification. The floodwaters are rising again, but this time they're made of consciousness rather than H2O. You can let them overwhelm you, or you can learn to swim in the ocean of expanded awareness that's surrounding our planet. You can become a victim of the transformation, or you can become one of its agents. The survivors of that drowned paradise didn't preserve their knowledge just to satisfy historical curiosity. They encoded their wisdom in myths and monuments, in symbols and sacred sites, in the very structure of human consciousness itself, because they knew that someday their descendants would need this information to avoid repeating the mistakes that destroyed their world. That someday is now. You are those descendants. The information they preserved is awakening in your awareness. The abilities they possessed are stirring in your consciousness. The choice they failed to make wisely is being offered to you. What will you choose? Will you remain safely unconscious, leaving the future of human civilization to chance and the decisions of others? Or will you accept the responsibility that comes with remembering your true nature as a conscious being capable of participating directly in the creation of reality itself? The network is waiting for your decision. The ancient wisdom keepers are watching from beyond the veil of ordinary perception. The future of consciousness on Earth depends on individuals like you who are willing to bridge the gap between the world that was lost and the world that could be born. The time for choosing is now. The cosmic cycles wait for no one. The flood is coming whether we're ready or not. But unlike the Atlanteans in their final days, you don't have to face it unprepared. You have their story as a guide. You have access to wisdom traditions from around the globe. You have technologies that could preserve knowledge across any conceivable catastrophe. Most importantly, you have the opportunity to complete the hero's journey that began with their fall and could culminate in our transcendence. To return from the underworld of forgetting with the elixir that can heal our world and establish paradise on foundations that will endure across cosmic ages. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The window is closing, and once it shuts, it may not open again for another 12,000 years.